Yo, what's good everyone? My name is Alex and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I make videos about photography, gear, tutorials, and more. So if that sounds interesting to you, please hit that subscribe button so you can find your way back for further videos. So I recently came back from a trip from Iceland and I took a ton of landscape shots as one does in Iceland. Of course, I had to photograph all of the famous mountains and waterfalls, but some of my most favorite images were minimalistic landscape shots. Now, before we get further into this video, I just want to state that a minimalistic photograph is not just about having 99% negative space and one small subject in the frame. While that can be part of it, minimalism is much deeper than that, and this discussion can get very philosophical. And I already know there are people out there who are going to say the photographs that I'm showing in this video are not minimalistic at all. But to me, a successful minimalistic photograph is able to elicit powerful emotions and tell a story through simple and artful compositions. Compositions that are stripped of visual clutter, keeping only the most essential elements in the frame. But if you disagree with me, please let me know in the comment section below, and I love to have this discussion with you guys. Anyway, so as I was on this trip, I thought it would be super easy to capture those minimalistic landscapes, but actually I found it quite challenging. Because when you're in such a surreal place like Iceland, where everywhere you turn are amazing compositions, you instinctively want to use a wide angle and capture all of it into the frame. It was actually pretty hard to strip away at those epic landscapes and really focus on simpler compositions. So if you're like me and want to create similar images, watch until the end because I share my top 5 tips on how to capture minimalistic landscapes. And best of all, these tips are not limited to gear. So you can take what you learned from this video and apply it to your own photography, no matter what camera you use or even with just your phone. Alright, so let's just jump right into tip number 1. This first tip is to be conscious of what kind of weather you're shooting in. Now obviously weather matters for all kinds of photography, but specifically for minimalistic landscapes, I found that shooting in cloudy, overcast weather is a great way to set a foundation for your landscape shot. For example, in this image, it was very foggy out, and I used that to my advantage. This low fog was able to cover the clutter and busy background in the back, eliminating those distractions. This is another image where you can see the cloudy sky blending together with the snowy landscape. This creates a clean slate for the two subjects. These kinds of images emphasize the vastness of a landscape without needing to capture the entire scene. Now tip number 2 is to zoom in. When shooting landscapes, people naturally want to use a wide angle to capture those sweeping vistas. While they can look amazing, they might not always be the most minimalistic shot. So by using a long lens and zooming into your frame, you can isolate a very narrow point of view. This way you can easily frame your composition with the specific things that you want in your frame, and you can choose to ignore everything else around it. For example, in this image, I used the 70-200 to zoom way into these 2 rocks in the ocean. They were actually part of a bunch of other rocks by the cliff, but in this composition, they are alone. And the visual focus is on the turbulent waves crashing against the rocks instead of the entire seascape. In the second image, I zoomed all the way into the foot of a waterfall. Once again, the rest of the scene is stripped away, and this composition shows the sheer power of the falls, and you wouldn't have been able to get this emotion from a wider shot. The person in that image just adds a point of scale, which leads me to my next tip. Having a small person or animal in the frame is a great way to add scale, and when used correctly is a powerful technique to elicit emotions of wonder and mystique. Other elements like cars or houses are also great because we have a mental idea of how big those things are and can compare them to other subjects in the frame. For example, this image has 2 tiny people standing in the middle of the frame. Without them, the viewer would have no idea how big this foreground is. It could be a small pile of dirt or a large vista. This next photo shows 2 horses at the foot of this mountain. This image combines tip number 2 and 3, using a zoomed in shot of the mountain, filling the entire frame, and then having those small animals to add scale. Tip number 4 is about shifting visual weight. Normally you want a balanced composition, usually along the rules of thirds grid. But by breaking those rules and shifting the weight, you can create really dynamic minimalistic shots. You can see what I mean in this image, where most of the frame is taken up by the sky. Normally, the top of this image wouldn't hold this much weight, but in this case, it leaves the landscape to fill a thin strip across the bottom. The second image is similar, with most of the frame filled on top and the subject at the very bottom for a simple yet powerful composition. My final tip is to deviate away from traditional landscape shots and try to create more unconventional and artful compositions. For example, this shot only has 2 colors and 2 elements in the frame. This is actually a full color image of water on a beach, and it's not even a black and white conversion, but the abstract nature is a unique change from a standard beach shot. This next image is even simpler and more abstract. It could be a drone shot of a lake or a macro shot of ice. The artful nature of these landscape images leave a lot up to interpretation and are much more interesting to look at. Having abstract landscape shots like this will definitely help your images stand out amongst the hundreds of other landscape images with mountains and oceans that you see everywhere. Alright, so that was my top 5 tips on how to create minimalistic landscape shots. If you used any of those tips, drop a comment down below with your Instagram and I'd love to check it out. If you found this video helpful, hit that thumbs up. And if you want to see more content like this and want to support my channel, I would really appreciate it if you hit subscribe. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Peace.